Of course, I did that. Okay, we are recording. All right, again, thank you again. My name is Ryan Sadler, and along with my duties with the Friends of MLK, I'm also the Associate Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at St. Ambrose University. So we're gonna dive right in, and the idea behind this lecture, this opportunity that we have before us, for me, is I wanted to tell a little bit about Dr. King's story, his legacy, of how he became the man that we see Dr. King to be. And we know Dr. King to have been. We know a lot about his I Have a Dream speech. We know a lot about the fact that Dr. King, thank you, the fact that Dr. King entered the arena of the civil rights fight at a young age. He was kind of forced into this in his new assignment at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. And so we know those things. I don't want to belabor the point in the quotes that Dr. King had and to tell those stories. I think we hear those a lot, and not that, and you'll hear them on maybe some on Saturday on his actual birthday, and then maybe some on Monday. If you tune into the radio and TV and CNN and all those other places, you'll see and hear the traditional Dr. King stories of his life, his dream, and maybe even some of, are we even close to Dr. King's dream, living that out today? And some will get into that debate. I'm not here for that, but I want to talk a little bit about how Dr. King, who shaped Dr. King into becoming the man that he became. What was his life like as a boy, as a child? What was he like in school? And then again, who were those major influencers? I think we all are eclectic in some way, in terms of the people we've come in contact with, our friends, our neighbors. We can all probably close our eyes and reflect. Maybe you don't have to close your eyes. You can close your eyes and reflect on your upbringing, your childhood, how your mother treated you, your father treated you, good or bad. Then something about the neighbors, an event, or events that happened, friendships that were shaped and good, and friendships that were shaped and then suddenly destroyed. The people in your life, whether it was from a religious sect or your familiar area, or it could have been your school, your communal self. We all are eclectic in some way and influenced by all of those external forces that have influenced us. Dr. King, I'm going to start back with talking about the mother and father of Dr. King, in particular, his father, Reverend Adam Daniel Williams, who became the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church. He was named AD for short, and it's important to remember AD. Although he was likely born in 1861 AD, he was the grandfather of Dr. King, the maternal grandfather of Dr. King. He celebrated his birthday on January 2nd, 1863, the day after the effective date of the Emancipation Proclamation, as his birthday. It's important that you keep that in your mind, because this is the first piece of the type of man that AD was, Dr. King's grandfather, who associated. He took 2 years to say, you know what, I wasn't born in 1861. I was born after the Emancipation Proclamation. It's important to think, because that's kind of the mindset that we began to put ourselves in terms of the family of Dr. King. In January of 1893, he left for Atlanta, where he was called to pastor of the Atlanta's Ebenezer Baptist Church. Although Ebenezer had only 13 members when he arrived, the congregation under his leadership grew to over 400 members by 1903. Reverend Williams then, AD, married Jenny Celeste Parks in 1899 and gave birth to their only child of 3 that survived infancy. That only child was the Alberta Christine Williams, the mother of Dr. King. She was born September of 1904. She ended up dying in June 30th, a tragic death in 1974. Williams, AD, was one of the pioneers of a distinctive African-American version of the social gospel. Again, leading up to the fact that when he celebrated his birthday. I don't know when he said my birthday is 1863, January 2, but he endorsed a strategy that combined elements of Booker T. Washington's emphasis on Black business development and W.E.B. Du Bois' says a call for civil rights activism. So he merged the two in his sermons and his messaging and in his life. As pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church for over 25 years, Williams infused his ministry with social activism by helping found the Atlanta chapter of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People in 1917. Then on Thanksgiving Day, I'm still keep looking to the side as I see if I need to let someone in. On Thanksgiving Day of 1926, Michael Luther King and Alberta Christine Williams were married. Michael is Daddy King, if those we understand and know that Martin's birth name was Michael. His dad's name was Michael until an experience he had that gave him the understanding of changing the name to the Martin Luther that we all know. And so, but Michael, Daddy King, and Alberta Mama King Williams married at Ebenezer. Those newlyweds moved into an upstairs bedroom of the Williams household on Auburn Avenue. The King family quickly expanded with the birth of Willie Christine in 1927, Michael Luther King Jr., Martin, in 1929, and Alfred A.D. Williams in 1930, a month after King Sr. received his bachelor's degree in theology. He received his degree from Morehouse. We'll talk more about that as well. Daddy King Sr. eventually, as we know, became pastor, succeeding AD as pastor Ebenezer. When Williams died in 1931, his obituary was effusive. It said this: AD was a signpost among his neighbors and a mighty oak in the Baptist forest of the nation. He was a preacher of unusual power, an appealing experimentalist, and a pervasive evangelist, and a convincing doctrinarian. That was Martin's grandfather, okay? Dr. King I'm not doing very well with managing this. Dr. King credited his father with influencing his decision to join the ministry, saying of his father, Daddy King, he set forth a noble example that I didn't mind following. Daddy King experienced a number of brutal incidents while growing up in the rural South, including he witnessed the lynching of a Black man. On another occasion, he had to subdue his drunken father. This is who was assaulting his mother. This was his grandfather, AD here. His mother took the children to Floyd Chapel Baptist Church to ease the harsh tone of the farm life, according to King Sr. He grew to respect a few Black preachers who were willing to speak out against racial injustices, despite the risk of the violent white retaliation. This was in the 1800s, okay? He gradually developed an interest in preaching, initially practicing eulogies on the family's chickens. By the end of 1917, he had decided to become a minister. In 1934, he attended the World Baptist Alliance in Berlin, King Sr. By traveling by ocean liner to France, he had 10 other ministers also toured historic sites in Palestine and the Holy Land. He's quoted as saying, "In Jerusalem, when I saw with my own eyes, the places where Jesus had lived and taught, a life spent in the ministry seemed to me even more compelling. Although too young to fully understand his father's activism, King Jr. later wrote that dinner discussions in the King household often touched on political matters, as King Sr. expressed his views about the ridiculous nature of segregation in the South. King Jr. had a fond memory of his daddy's resistance to those injustices. I'll talk about two occasions. One occasion, he remembered witnessing his father standing up to a police officer who stopped Elder King for a traffic violation and referred to him as boy. This is the South, pretty typical. According to King Jr., his indignant father responded by pointing to his son and asserting, "This is a boy, but I'm a man. And until you can call me one, I will not listen to you." Shocked, and maybe his life on the line, talking to a police officer in that day and time, as such, police officer wrote the ticket up and nervously and left the scene as quickly as possible. He was alone. But that's one of the pieces, right, that we shape Dr. King and who he was. Another example of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s understanding of his father and experience. They went to a store to buy a pair of shoes. And so it was a white-owned store in Atlanta. They sat in the front of the store near a window, and the clerks came up and said, "I'll be happy to wait on you, but you'll just have to take one of the seats there in the back because, yeah, so we'll have to wait on you there." Daddy King replied, "Nothing wrong with these seats." The clerk said, "No, I'm sorry, but you're gonna have to go to the back in order for me to serve you and for you to buy any shoes." Dr. King, Daddy King finally said, "We'll buy shoes sitting here or we won't buy shoes at all." After a while, a minute or two had passed as he recites this. The clerk had shrugged it off and walked away, obviously wasn't coming back. Daddy King grabbed Martin by the hand, took him outside, looked him in the face on the sidewalk right outside the store. And in a voice, they say, flushed with anger, he said, "I am never going to accept it. I'll oppose it to the day I die." We see the impact of families, of Dr. King's father and his grandfather. You would think from those stories that I would probably be talking more about Malcolm X than Martin Luther King. But we're talking about Martin. In 1895, a two-story frame Queen Anne style house was built for a white family at 501 Auburn Avenue. The home was purchased by Reverend A.D. Williams, Martin's grandfather, for $3,500. Reverend Williams moved into the house with his wife, Janine Celeste, and their 6-year-old daughter, Alberta Christine, Martin's mother. When Miss Alberta Christine married a minister, Martin Sr., in 26, at her father's church, Ebenezer, instead of moving in with her new husband, he moved in with her and her parents in the family home. Over time, the Kings would have 3 children born in the home: Willie, Christine, Michael Jr., and again, A.D. A few things about Martin as a boy while in this house I have to share. Martin wasn't a saint by any means. I would say he was what I would say a typical boy, a child that got in trouble. He loved to have fun. There's a little bit of deviance about him. And so maybe some of all of us have some of this in us. I don't know. But I saw myself in some of this. He once clobbered his brother AD over the head with the telephone, knocking him completely out. The sister tells the story, Sister Christine tells the story, how he couldn't help but notice how he always seemed to be in the bathroom when it was his time to do the dishes. None of them care for piano lessons. Sounds like my house, and my upbringing. I know I got brothers over here, brothers. And so Mama King had them, she wanted them all to learn piano. So she had a piano teacher coming by the house to teach them piano lessons. They came up with a master plan of how they could get out of having piano lessons. AD started by taking a hammer and just hammering it away at the piano. And Christine and Martin was like, no, we can't do that. Stop, we gotta be smart about this. So in their brilliance as older siblings, they told AD, why don't you just unscrew the screws from the legs of the piano bench and let's sabotage the piano. And so sure enough, so AD did all the work, but his older siblings convinced him what to do. But so sure enough, their plan worked as well as they planned it, as far as they knew the plan would go. Music teacher came in, she sat down on the stool, and yes, you guessed it, she crashed to the floor, and they had their immediate laugh, but got a good lashing by Daddy King. He didn't play. This wasn't the only time that Martin, I say, got touched by his father. Daddy King would say that Junior would stand there and have tears or crying like he's about to die, and not a tear fall from his eyes. Grandma Williams couldn't stand to see Martin. They, somewhere described Martin as kind of one of her favorites, the other siblings. And I think, that's kind of naturally a kind of siblings kind of, somehow that's your favorite. But she would always have a big hug and a kind word to help him after he got his lashings. Dr. King called his grandmother, Mother Williams, Mama. They were extremely close. A story is told that one day while roughhousing with his brother AD in the house, AD slid down the front step banister and ran right into Mama, knocked her out. Young Martin thought that they had killed her, thought AD had killed her. So he went to a bedroom on the second floor of the home, jumped out of the window, 12 feet in the air, jumped out the window because he thought they had killed their grandmother. Well, she was fine. They came out and told him, so he just got up and walked away. He was kind of a rough kid. They said that if he played basketball or football with you, you knew that he was there because he was kind of a short guy, but rough house. So jumping out the window probably wasn't much to him. On another occasion, Martin had snuck out the house on a Sunday afternoon to go to a parade, something that Daddy King forbid. Not knowing the influences, not knowing what might happen at a parade in Atlanta in the South. Well, when he returned home to sobbing and sadness. And when he discovered that his grandmother had passed away from a heart attack, he felt guilty and ashamed and felt like it was his fault because he did something that defied what his father wanted him to do, wouldn't have wanted him to do. And Martin goes up to that same bedroom, jumps out of that same window. This time he didn't pop right up, but he laid there in his grief as he just took on all of that this woman that he loved, his grandmother, is now gone. And he feels some guilt associated with that. Grandpa Williams died in the home of a heart attack in 1931. Now Mama Williams died of a heart attack in 1941. In his autobiography, Daddy King stated that the birth home was beginning to run down. As a child, Daddy King dreamed of owning a yellow brick house. So in 1941, the Kings moved into that yellow brick house at 193 Boulevard. That home stayed in the family when they moved and became rental property for the family. After Dr. King's assassination on April 4th in 1968, plans had begun to restore the house as a historic museum. Today, in some of the pictures, these pictures that you see here are pictures that I took this summer on my visit to Atlanta in my civil rights kind of journey this summer, this past summer. And you can visit the house. COVID kind of restricted some things, but they only let 15 people in. The day we were there, we couldn't get in, so I did not get inside. It's first come, first served basis, and the tours are there. So I would encourage anyone that's listening that if you get a chance to visit Atlanta and get a chance to stop by this National Historic Site, it's a few blocks and homes, and this is the home across the street that's on display, talking about the birthplace, and the view from across the street is kind of like an account of the neighbor talking about the respect that the King family had in the community. So just giving an account from another vantage point of Dr. King growing up. And then, of course, outside there across the street, it has these views of inside the home. Right next door to the right of it is a museum that was open, and so you can buy merch and other things in there. At age 15, young Martin was admitted into college. I'm skipping all of his everything before high school, okay, for sake of time. He was admitted into college in 1944, age 15, following his junior year in high school. He also skipped ninth grade in high school. There's this piece that Martin was bright, and I think we know that Martin was bright, but Martin didn't give his all in school. In 44, there was something else going on in our country, in our world. The school's enrollment fell, and the wartime draft was upon us. And so there were some efforts and things that, for him, going to college was one of those pieces at 15, but was one of those pieces he knew he needed an education, wanted education. He didn't quite know he wanted to be a preacher yet. But following in the footsteps of both his father and his maternal grandfather, A.D., King began his studies at Morehouse College there in Atlanta. Although King's years at Morehouse were characterized by middling academic performances, his experiences outside the classroom set him on a path toward the ministry and the struggle for civil rights. A friend of King's, Walter McCall, recalled that King was an ordinary student. During his time at Morehouse, I don't think he took his studies very seriously, but serious enough to get by. King did, however, flourish in other areas, winning second prize in the John L. Webb oratorical competition in 1946 and in 1948. King was president of the Sociology Club, as well as a member of the debate team, student council, the Glee Club, and the Ministers Union. King also joined the Morehouse chapter of the NAACP and played on the Butler Street YMCA basketball team. King examined other professions besides the ministry, of course. He considered becoming a doctor, but had a little aptitude for science. He chose law. He said, I was at the point where I was deeply interested in political matters and social ills. I could see the part I could play in breaking down the legal barriers to Negroes. Sometimes they say, King said he would stand in front of the mirror in his bedroom at home and pretend to make courtroom speeches to the imaginary jury that he was presenting his case to. Obviously, didn't go down that path, but if we think about his oratorical skills, the fact that he won awards for that, and we think about his delivery, he would have been a great lawyer. King's growing awareness of social and political issues while at Morehouse is evident in the surviving writings from his undergraduate years. The summer before his junior year, King wrote a letter to the editor of the Atlanta Constitution, responding to a series of racially motivated murders in Georgia. In the letter, King summarized the goals of Black citizens. He says this, his quote is this: "We want and are entitled to the basic rights and opportunities of American citizens. The right to earn a living at work for which we are fitted by training and ability, equal opportunities in education, health, recreation, and similar public services, the right to vote, equality before the law, some of the same courtesy and good manners that we ourselves bring to all human relations. Powerful. And this is captured in some of his undergrad in the Atlanta Constitution while he was an undergrad student. That same year, the school paper, the Maroon Tiger, published King's article, The Purpose of Education, in which he argued that education had both a utilitarian and a moral function. King asserted that the function of education was to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. The following year, his commitment to social change was strengthened through his involvement with the Intercollegiate Council, an interracial Atlanta student group that met monthly to discuss various social issues. King's participation with white students from Emory University in these meetings helped him to overcome his own anti-white feelings. He later recalled, as I got to see more of white people, my resentment was softened and a spirit of cooperation took its place. And, you know, you think about the life that he grew up in and hearing those stories and experiences that we shared about what his father, for instance, shared in the shoe store or the police officer and witnessing those. There's this natural piece of resistance that he would have had, this disdain, growing up in an all-Black neighborhood, all-Black school, well, pretty much all-Black neighborhood, all-Black school and Black church, and his surroundings was all that. And what he heard and knew wasn't kosher, even to the point, I think he was 5 years old when the neighbor, his father, white guy, said, one of the neighbors, guys that he loved to play with, said that he could no longer play with him because, and the boy didn't know, but so Martin talked to his mom and dad, and they pulled him to the side and said, well, because you're Black and he's white. And they had to start learning that piece, as this white boy had to start learning this piece, that he can't be that close to a Black child. So age 5 is it's almost too late. So we got to start creating these differences. His years at Morehouse under the tutelage of then President Dr. Benjamin E. Mays, he served as president from 1940 to 1967. That played a critical role in King's college experience, guiding King back to his roots. So take the doctor out the picture, take the lawyer out the picture, and the other things that he may have dreamt on. He got back to his roots and to his family calling, and he decided to become a Baptist preacher after all. President Mays was described by King as one of the great influences in my life. Mays believed that Black colleges should be experimental stations in democratic living and challenged Morehouse students to struggle against segregation rather than accommodate themselves to it. Mays preached every Tuesday morning in the college's chapel and introduced many students to Gandhi's philosophy of nonviolence, which Dr. Mays had gained an appreciation for during his own travels to India, where he met and had conversations with Gandhi when Gandhi was working through things actually in South Africa. Through Dr. Mays, Dr. King discovered a Black minister didn't have to be fiery and emotional like Daddy King was in his preaching. Instead, he could be like Dr. Mays, a minister, a preacher that, as we say, didn't have to hoop and holler, but Dr. Mays could deliver the message without all of the emotions attached to it. And he grabbed and captivated Martin's attention in those Tuesday morning sessions. It was the summer of 1947 when King, he's now 18 years old, told his parents he meant to be a minister. Daddy King was so elated that he said, prove it. He didn't want to show him how elated he was. He said, prove it. So Martin had to deliver his, what we call a trial sermon there at Ebenezer Baptist Church. It is said that after that sermon, Daddy King, he could no longer hold those emotions. He dropped to his knees and thanked God for giving him such a wonderful son. It was then in February 25th of 1948 that King was ordained a minister and made assistant pastor at Ebenezer Baptist Church. Okay. Now, after completing his undergraduate work at Morehouse, So then we fast forward to in 1948, King moves up north. He goes to attend Crozer Theological Seminary in Pennsylvania. This where Crozer is a little bit south of Philadelphia along the Delaware River. He was drawn to the school's unorthodox reputation and the liberal theological leanings of the school. It was at Crozer that King strengthened his commitment to the Christian social gospel, developed his initial interest in Gandhian ideas, was first exposed to pacifism, and developed his ideas about nonviolence as a method of social reform. While King worked with white students from Emory, Crozer was really the first time King attended an integrated school. Enrollment at Crozer was a little over 100 students, maybe, yeah, right around there. King was one of only 11 Black students at the seminary in 48. He was initially self-conscious, and it's, again, to think about him as a self-conscious person, certainly he said they viewed Blacks as lazy, laughing, sloppy, and tardy. He said of his early experiences at Crozer, if I were a minute late to class, I was almost morbidly conscious of it and sure that everyone noticed it. He recalled being grimly serious for a time. He said, I had a tendency to overdress to keep my room spotless, my shoes perfectly shined, and my clothes immaculately pressed. For a short while, he dated the white woman, a relationship unthinkable in Atlanta. But through the years, he became more comfortable developing a meaningful relationship with classmates and professors. He did experience some of the ugliness of racism out there. On one occasion, and I believe this was early in his time there, one of the white students from the South burst into King's room, blaming him for a dormitory prank, pointing a revolver in his direction. Others intervened and hauled the student away. King let the matter drop, neither pressing charges nor appealing to the Crozer administration. And his calm reaction to the incident won the respect of nearly everyone on campus. By the end of his first year, he was one of the most popular students around. He was elected president in his third year there. Obviously, some of the practices that we see of the nonviolent piece have already been ingrained in his mind from a theoretical, even from a theoretical to a practical piece, where he's now practicing some of these. I don't know how I would feel in my freshman year in college if I had a student point a gun at me. I might want justice to the fullest extent of the law at that point. So, King came of age academically at Crozer. His academic record at Morehouse had been, like I said, mediocre at best. He was a constant A student, though, at Crozer. He studied preaching with Robert Keaton, beginning his first term with Keaton's class, Preaching Ministry. King drafted an assignment for that class that revealed many of his early concepts of the role of preaching, which he called one of the most vital needs in our society, if it's used correctly. King's commitment to addressing social needs and the ills was evident in his closing words. I must be concerned about unemployment, slums, and economic insecurity. I am a profound advocate of the social gospel. In November of 49, King was introduced to pacifism in the lecture by A.J. Muster of the Fellowship of Reconciliation. Although not immediately convinced of the practicality of Muster's position, King later attended a sermon by Dr. Mordecai Johnson, president of Howard University. He gained a more in-depth lesson of the life and teachings of Mahatma Gandhi, or Mohandas Gandhi, K. Gandhi, the leader of the struggle of the Indian people for independence from Great Britain. Gandhi believed that the power of love insisted that any action or protest against the British imperialists be peaceful and nonviolent. This no-eating man, thin man, stood up to the British imperial government in 47 and saw the struggle won when the British Army admitted defeat and India gained its freedom. It was through Gandhi's emphasis on love and nonviolence that King discovered the methods of social reform that he had been seeking for. King was also greatly inspired by George Washington Davis, who expanded his knowledge of social gospel philosophy and introduced him to the writings of Reinhold Niebuhr. If you recall, King had heard of Gandhi from Benjamin E. Mays, President Morehouse, now at Crozier. It's beginning to shape more and more. He was most attracted to Gandhi's concept of satyagraha, 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 or the peaceful defiance of government, is what Gandhi defined that as. He expressed his philosophy that nonviolence is a power that can transform adversaries into adversaries into friends and resolve issues of injustice and oppression. Gandhi developed this philosophy in his struggles against racial discrimination in South Africa, and eventually employed satyagraha tactics against British rule in India during his campaign for their independence. Even though Americans were in the Black American story was vastly different from the Indian story, King saw that our struggles were vastly different, and the technique of active nonviolent resistance to evil as the only moral and peaceful path to liberation. In 1951, the year of King's graduation from Crozier, Dean Charles Batten praised him as one of the most outstanding students, as someone who exhibited fine preparation and an excellent mind and a thorough grasp of the material. King graduated from Crozier with honors as class valedictorian and was also the recipient of a $1,300 Pearl Flacker Award for scholarship, which he used to pursue his PhD at the well-regarded School of Theology at Boston U. Daddy King respected what King, his scholarly ambitions. But Daddy King wanted him back at Ebenezer. He wanted him back to be to eventually take over the church, to be there and to do these things. But King wanted this degree. He was attracted to Boston U for something that he said he didn't understand fully at the time. So he ends up at Boston University, and his dad actually awarded him with this decision by giving him a bright green Chevrolet. I don't know if it was new or what, but give him a bright green Chevrolet that he was able to go from Atlanta and drive up to Boston. Now, King didn't want to live in the residence hall in the dorms anymore, so he actually found an apartment off campus. Story is that King, like I said, was a guy, he liked to party, he liked to have fun, he enjoyed life. And so he wanted to enjoy the amenities of Boston and didn't want to feel restricted by those because he was living on a college campus. They say he had no trouble meeting young women, attractive women, but he complained to a friend from the South. Her name was Mary Powell. He told Mary that, I just miss these girls up north. They don't have that particular charm of a Southern woman. Powell asked fellow students from Alabama, her fellow student from Alabama with Coretta, if she was interested in meeting a Southern friend studying divinity. Scott was not interested in dating a preacher, but eventually allowed Martin to telephone her based on her friend Mary Powell's description and vouching that he was a good guy. So the story is told from one account that on that first phone call, this is the first phone call that Martin has with Coretta, y'all. The first phone call that King says to Coretta, I am like Napoleon at Waterloo before your charms. To which she replied, you haven't even met me. Now, Coretta tells the story, her account goes like this, that Martin says, you know, every Napoleon has his Waterloo, and I'm at my Waterloo and I'm on my knees. So Coretta, she laughed and he asked her to have lunch the very next day. She happily accepted. She was flattered, of course. They went out on dates in his green Chevrolet. And after the second date, they say that King was certain that Coretta possessed the qualities he sought for in a wife. He told her, you have everything I have ever wanted in a wife. There are only 4 things, and you have them all. He said quietly, listing character, intelligence, personality, and beauty. As many of you know, Coretta made it to Memphis to attend the march after Dr. King had been assassinated. She made it back to the march rally. She said, Martin would have wanted me here. Her journey to becoming an activist was somewhat in her blood as well. She had actually been an activist in her undergrad at Antioch College in Ohio. And before she went to New England Conservatory of Music, is where she was attending classes when she and Martin met. She had planned to pursue a career as a singer before meeting Dr. King. She couldn't resist the charm of King, and she became deeply in love with him. I mean, with lines like that, I mean, he poured it on heavy. But she became deeply in love with him, and would go home, went to Atlanta. Daddy King didn't want him to marry her. Daddy King wanted him to marry someone from Atlanta, because he knew the Atlanta South women. And so Daddy King was set on his ways in a lot of ways, a typical kind of piece of this bearing, so I'm not sure, overbearing, but this bearing piece of opinion. Coretta said that she told Daddy King in conversation, well, you know, I have something to offer Martin too. Martin told his mom in the kitchen, he said, there is nothing that's going to get in the way of me marrying this woman. And so it was June 18th, Daddy King finally gave in and performed the marriage ceremony in the lawn of Coretta's parents in Alabama. Coretta had to vow to obey her husband, removed actually from the ceremony, which was of course unusual at the time, and probably, I don't know about now. But like his father, King held a traditional view of marriage. During their courtship, he told Coretta he expected his wife to be a mother and a homemaker. He was glad for her to finish her musical studies in Boston, and he was delighted to help out around the house until she graduated. But a singing career for her, he told her, was not going to happen. It was out of the question. He said, I'm supposed to earn, she says in her words that he told her, I'm supposed to earn enough to take, Martin said, I'm supposed to earn enough to take care of you and the family. She accepted her role and said that if she had not married as strong of a man as Martin, that she would have worn the pants. Dr. King was such a very strong man. She said there was never a chance of that happening. King did so well at Boston, he was encouraged to stay in academia by the instructors there. He decided not to stay in that, of course, and he wanted to get back. King worked as an assistant minister in Boston at Boston's historic 12th Baptist Street, where a good friend of Daddy King was Pastor Reverend William Hunter Hester. He was regarded as the dean of Boston's clergy. There, he also met influential figure, Dr. Howard Thurman, who you see in the picture in the bottom left of King. And Dr. Howard Thurman was the dean of Marsh Chapel and professor of spiritual disciplines and resources at Boston U. Thurman's commitment to a spiritual and physical integrated society and to the methods of Gandhianism of nonviolence served as another major influence on King's life. In 1935, Thurman and his wife traveled with others in a pilgrimage and got their chance to actually associate and learn more from Gandhi and really talk about the difference between the African-American struggle in America and the Indian struggle there in India. After Boston U, and according to Thurman, he and King only met informally during King's last years as a doctoral student. They watched the World Series on the TV at Dr. Thurman's home with his wife. His wife, Sue, and Martin discussed very seriously the possibilities of his coming to Fellowship Church. It was then that she discovered his commitment to Montgomery. So in '55, a letter written less than a month before Montgomery was boycott, Thurman communicated his regret that he would not be able to preach at Dexter Avenue. Their men's day, Martin had set up for Thurman to come and speak. And then during the bus boycott, King's friend and biographer Lerone Bennett reported that King read and reread Thurman's 1949 work, Jesus and the Disinherited, which interprets Jesus' teaching through the experience of the oppressed and the need for a nonviolent response to such oppression. I'll move on from there. Then we get to this idea of the influence and these principles that that Dr. King really developed, these 6 principles of nonviolence. I'm not going to read them all. I'll leave them on the screen for a little bit, but the fundamental tenets of Dr. King's philosophy of nonviolence described in his first book, Stride Toward Freedom. Dr. King often said he got his inspiration from Jesus Christ and his technique from Mahatma Gandhi. These principles should be embraced as a lifestyle. When referring to the African-American freedom struggle, Gandhi had called the practice of segregation negation of civilization. Principle or the president of Howard, Benjamin Mays, meets Gandhi in '35. Thurman met Gandhi in '35. William Stewart Nelson in 1946. King's colleague Bayard Rustin, James Lawson, and Mordecai Johnson have also visited India. These are major influences on King. Bayard Rustin was affectionately referred to as Mr. March on Washington by A. Philip Randolph. He was the one who organized and led the protests in 1940s, 50s, and 60s, a lot of them, including the '63 March on Washington. And again, one of those pieces that people talk about that of Dr. King, that Rustin was a known homosexual and a former affiliation with the Communist Party led some to question King's relationship with Rustin. But King recognized the importance of Rustin's skills and dedication to the movement. So in 1960, a letter, King told a colleague, "We are thoroughly committed to the methods of nonviolence in our struggle, and we are convinced that Bayard's expertness and commitment in this area will be of inestimable value." It was actually Lawson who met King in '57, who encouraged James Lawson, who's also influenced by Gandhi, who encouraged King to move to, King urged Lawson to move to the South and began teaching nonviolence on a larger scale. Later that year, Lawson transferred to Vanderbilt in Nashville, and a lot of the training and nonviolence piece that happened in Nashville in the movement were under the tutelage of James Lawson. '68, it was Lawson who requested King travel to Memphis, Tennessee, to draw attention to the plight of striking sanitation workers. And it was during that campaign that King was assassinated. It was clear that Gandhian philosophy were a special interest of progressive African-American community. It's also clear that Dr. King's kind of piece of a beloved community is a realistic vision of an achievable society, one in which problems and conflict exist, but are resolved peacefully and without bitterness. In the beloved community, caring and compassion drive political policies that support the worldwide elimination of poverty and hunger and all forms of bigotry and violence. The beloved community is a state of heart and mind, a spirit of hope and goodwill that transcends our boundaries and barriers and embraces all creation. At its core, the beloved community is an engine of reconciliation. This way of living seems a long way from the kind of world we have now, but I do believe it is a goal that can be accomplished through courage and determination and through education and training, if enough people are willing to make the necessary commitment. We could probably say the same thing today, I believe, because we're not there. Dr. King's ordination in 48 at age 19 led him through his schooling and back to Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, where the bus boycott started. 59, he resigned from Dexter, moved back to Atlanta to direct the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which he helped found. He was co-pastor with his father from 1960 until his assassination in 68. Now, in the years leading to his assassination, the preacher, the civil rights activist, was less popular than ever. In 1963, he had a 45% positive rating and a 37% negative rating. In 65, it was 45% to 45%, like, not like. Then in 66, the last year that Gallup measures King using those procedures, almost 2/3 of Americans had an unfavorable opinion of Dr. King, and 1/3 had a positive opinion. A 26-point rate increase from 1963. King's stance in the Vietnam War in 1967 was an unpopular move that hurt his standing in the Black community and the political world. His stance on the agenda for the Poor People's Campaign in 68, which was to take a deep dive into the restructuring of our economic system in America, threatening the power structure. He had shown success in Operation Chicago, was clearly moving operations from the South to the plight of the Negro in the North, or at least adding, not necessarily moving, but adding to the struggle. 1999 Gallup poll showed that Dr. King was the second. So we fast forward to 1999. Polls showed that King was the second most admired American of the 20th century. He received 34% of the votes. Who came in first? Mother Teresa. She received 49%. Following Mother Teresa and King were JFK, Albert Einstein, Helen Keller, FDR, Billy Graham, Pope John II, Eleanor Roosevelt, and Winston Churchill. Dr. King, I had a video I was going to show, but I'm not going to show it, was a man shaped by a lot of others who influenced him, a lot of adversity in his life and the lives of his grandfather, his father, his siblings. He was a man like a human being, I should say, like all of us. But he was influenced and he absorbed kind of the things in his life that helped shape him, those things that he had this passion. He had something down him. I really do believe that Dr. King was called for such a time. In one of his speeches, he said if God were to ask him, or he would be able to ask God what time period he want to live in, he fast forwarded every period of time from the day of Jesus to on up through time. And he said he would live in the exact time that he lived in. And he said just a few years after Kennedy's assassination, Dr. King said to someone that's going to happen to me. I'm not going to live to see 40. It is told that he and Martin and Malcolm, in their conversation, that Malcolm told Martin that there's a price on our heads. They can't afford to let us live because we have too much power. Apparently, Malcolm told Martin that if you die before I do, please, I don't care for the nonviolent way. Look at by any means necessary. We have to win this struggle. I hope that in this piece you see the man that Dr. King, what shaped him to fight for the injustices that he saw. Why he stood almost on an island by himself to speak out against our or activity in Vietnam. That took his favorability ratings way down, while he stood up against the injustices of our society when it came to racism and hate, why he did what he did, and why he moved to the economic move, because he wanted to see change. He felt a calling to pastor. He felt a calling for this social change that we celebrate today. But I wonder if we want to celebrate really the changes that we may still need to make. All of us, it can be, can carry on that dream, that hope that Dr. King, that fight that Dr. King put in. It's on us. I want to share just a few things that we have going on Monday. The Blessing Box campaign, and it's items that you could bring to fill the blessing box, and they supply things that will go out in their food pantry and other areas to community members in need of those toiletry items. It's sometimes very embarrassing to ask for some of those items and whatnot. So Punch, People Uniting Neighborhood Churches, have put together this blessing box campaign, and we've assisted with them in this for the past 3 years, and we will continue to do that. And then our program, Friends of MLK and Punch, we will have our program on Monday at 11 a.m. on the Rogowski Center at St. Ambrose. It will be an abbreviated program due to COVID. We are not doing our community service project at the beginning, but we will have a light lunch afterwards that is free. So please join us for that and support us, and if you can. I'm not sure if I could ask questions and how that would go. I don't know if I can hear people. If you want to try, if anyone has a question or a comment, by all means, you can. Or you can type it in, because I don't know if I can hear in this.
Ryan, can you hear? This is JJ. Ryan, can you hear?
I have a comment that you could.
A comment, okay.
That you could ask everyone maybe. Yeah. What would it look like today if we're thinking about this idea of creating a beloved community to work as an engine toward reconciliation of our very polarized society right now? What could we do right now to build a beloved community?
I don't know if people heard that, but what could we do to build that beloved community is the question. And I guess I entertain that from anyone. Yeah, I can't hear you all. So if you have a comment, I can see the comments, but I can't hear you. So I'm not sure how to change that. But so at your statement or comment in the chat box, let me try one more thing here and see if, okay, someone say something. I'll see if I can hear you if I change it to, I just changed one thing on here.
Yes, can you hear us now, Ryan?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can. Thank you. Right. So the question is what did it look like today are to have a beloved community in where we are? Does anyone on here want to answer that or have an opinion on that? How do we get to a beloved community? I think we're so polarized, it's tough to be there. We have to put pride aside. We have to put our individual egos aside. Dr. King was fighting for a beloved community in an environment where a beloved community really, it wasn't present. It's not like he was fighting for something that he had seen before on a mass scale. And so I think sometimes we get the impression that we've been at this place of we all love our brother and our sister as ourselves. And I don't think we've ever been there as America, as a country. But if we reflect on Dr. King and his speeches, and we look at some of the pieces of even his predecessors and Booker T and W.B. and Frederick Douglass, and they reflected back on the Emancipation Proclamation, they reflected back on the foundation, the Constitution of this country, I should say. we hold these truths to be self-evident. I think, I don't know if we've ever been there, that we really have considered one another as truly, as I use the words, having God-given dignity and worth. We're in a society, and we've always been in America, where we devalue one person for whatever reason, whether it's race, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, whatever it may be, ability, disability. Some of those things came to light later, but we've always had this piece of divisiveness in America. And so we're working towards something that is idealistic in America. But he believed that we could be there. So anyone else have a comment to that, or another statement, a comment, or question?
Ryan, this is JJ. Let me double down on your answer to that question and then raise another one. I think that just like King found a foundation upon which most people could agree, what we have to try and find now in our country is a foundation upon which most people can agree. Unfortunately, division and specifically political divisiveness has clouded the judgment of people on the right and the left. And the divide between us politically now dictates how we think about all other matters. And so the things that, the issues and things that we had made progress on, for instance, over the last 30, 40, 50 years, have now become challenges for us, because now we're working from a position of stubbornness and being stuck in with a particular ideology, and as opposed to trying to find ways to make things work. We are only looking for ways to make things work for us. That kind of stubbornness and selfishness will continue to prevent us from getting to a beautiful community. My question to you would be this, in the great presentation, I had met Dr. Ralph Abernathy back in the early 90s. He came to the University of Iowa and met us at the Afro House. And he was, as you know, a contemporary of Dr. King's. He gave us a whole lot of personal information about Dr. King, but not even he gave us as much personal information as you gave us. So thank you for that information. What my question would be is this: why do you think that Dr. King has become so much of a beloved figure in death, and was such a vilified figure in life?
A great question, and I pondered that. And I guess for me, we take a look back at, well, even now, right? I think the opportunities we miss to simply say I love you to someone doesn't mean that I don't love you. It means I missed the opportunity to tell you. We sing a song that "Give Me My Flowers" when someone is gone, to give me my flowers while I'm living. And I think we ought to do that. Now, Dr. King obviously did not. He wasn't liked because in the moment, he was causing, this is social activism, social change. And we as human beings don't like to change. We like for somebody else to have to change, as you stated already earlier, but we ourselves don't like to change. And he was calling for us to do something, whether we're Black, white, Hispanic, whether we were rich or poor, when you look at the Populist campaign. And he was asking us and encouraging and demanding that we do something that was uncomfortable with us in our personal selves. When you look at his letter from the Birmingham jail, he put on notice every white pastor and preacher in the area that some had a message of, oh, we want to help, but they weren't showing up, they weren't there. He put on notice even Blacks in the North for the lack of participation. When he came to Chicago, and he looked, he saw for folks that would help. And you had these people who didn't even want to seemingly help themselves, yet it became a successful operation, Operation Breadbasket, and the work that they did in Chicago and economic change, where they were looking at boycotting certain industries and just buy from either certain industries, and it weren't that many Black-owned industries, but don't buy for these because they're clearly not supporting the cause. And so we will hurt them in their pocketbook. But it calls people to do something different. Look at us today in the convenience of, and I'll take something totally different topic, but similar. Chick-Fil-A stance on LGBTQ. And we have people who rest in LGBTQ support, but they love Chick-fil-A. And there was this moment of saying boycott Chick-fil-A, and people may have done it for a little bit, but then they couldn't resist it because they wanted the chick sandwiches. And so I think we're at this point right now. You have some who will stand, but you have some who just are not willing to get out of their comfort zone and do something different to really cause the impact that we need maybe for change. And Dr. King was a drum major for justice. And as the drum major, you're going to be noticed. You can't see and hear the rest of the drum corps quite the same, but you see the drum major. And that's who he was. But it was pushing us to do something other than what our flesh was comfortable with, that our minds could conceive. And we still struggle today, even with the first question, our beloved community. It's a struggle to really think about that because we've never been there. We may have had it in our homes at a period of time, maybe, but we don't. Mayberry is fictional. We're working towards something, and it's hard to perceive that change that we may need. But I really think that, Dr. King was just, he was that drum major. He was asking us to do something, a society to do something that they weren't ready to do. And it's obvious, right? I mean, to have his march in Chicago, for instance, he had folks throwing rocks at him. And he made a statement that said that all the stuff that he had been through in the South, the protests, the marching, everything, he said nothing compared to how folks in Chicago treated him. So that's my thought right now. Anyone else have anything to share? I appreciate you all joining us. So the library closes in 15 minutes, so I have to leave. I'm just hearing this whole thing. But, well, thank you all for joining us. Again, much appreciation, and thank you to the Davenport Public Library and this the speaking series of things that they have. My dear friend Leslie Ross here from is gracious enough to fill in, and Rachel Rudd, who I've been working with the Davenport Library. So thank you to you all for asking me to do this and trusting me to do this. I've had fun doing some of this research, some things I learned in doing this. And again, I hope you all learned some things as well. Did you have a comment? Shay?
Oh, Ryan, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, I just wanted to say again, thank you for the presentation. Wonderful information. As a person that loves history, I really appreciate it. The walk through time. And it's not a question, but a comment or a statement that you've heard multiple times before. But I guess in America today, have we or will we get another big moment? You said Dr. King would not have wanted to live in any other time but the time that he was in. Have we had another big moment? Will we have another big moment, or have we missed our big moment?
I think we missed a moment. I think we had a chance for a big moment recently with George Floyd murder. And I think it was a time to galvanize, but I think in us looking for a leader and not, again, being as divisive as we are, we haven't entrusted anyone to be that. If you remember in Ferguson, Missouri, when that went down and you had the old guard, those who walked with Dr. King, Jesse Jackson and those guys, they went into Ferguson wanting to move in their tactics and their ways. But the younger guard said, no, we got this. You try it your way, we're gonna do it our way. And so we have this flux, but again, it's no different than what King saw, because the Student Nonviolent Course SNCC started and other organizations started under that really defined, and Malcolm X and the Black Muslim movement. There was a lot of competition, yet King still rose to the top. Why? Because I really think he was chosen by God for such a time as that. He understood the assignment, as they say today, and he walked in it. I'm not sure today that we have many people willing to face death, knowing that you're going to die, and to still keep up the charge that you have. Now, if you're called by God and know that, and you walk in that, then you should be willing. We say that, I'm a soldier in the army of the Lord, and sing these songs, but do we really mean that? And I'm not sure we have anyone today that is really willing to face the threat of death seriously for the cause of social justice, social activism. We may have some, but I'm not sure we have anyone at that level, that value, that will demand that respect that Dr. King demanded, and can galvanize the right people together. Well, we didn't in the George Floyd thing. I think that was our time. America was ready for change. A lot of Black business support came out of it, a lot of rallying around things Black. Black Lives Matter movement gained a heightened awareness. And and then a year ago hit, January 6th. And we got to see really what the resistance was all about, and how far our federal government would allow things to go for the resistance of equitable practices, and pushing towards equitable practices. Federal government, Dr. King, so Kennedy and Johnson, they actually eventually stepped in and gave federal National Guard support for some of the marches. If you remember Selma, the march from Montgomery to Atlanta, they had to come in, and the federal government came in. We look at Ruby Bridges and the integration of schools, integration of University of Mississippi. There's federal government stepped in for the side of justice, and so I'm not sure even our federal government is willing to step in that piece, because that was a crux. So you need all those things to align, and I'm not sure if another moment will come. I'm not sure what it's going to take. But the murder of someone like George Floyd, and that we all saw with our own eyes, is really somewhat equivalent to Bull O'Connor and the methods that were being used in that time when they're first put on TV for America to see, and not just read, but to see it. And again, that's what convinced Kennedys to intervene, was the fact that they could see that. Anyway.
And Ryan, remember the Lyndon Johnson, he springboarded off of what Kennedy started. It was after Kennedy's death that Lyndon Johnson picked up the mantle and ran with the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Acts, and finally got those over the hump. And that kind of in and of itself saved it was a major part of saving the movement.
Yes.
Dr. King was a major figurehead of the movement, but there was a lot that went on behind the scenes that kept the movement afloat during those tumultuous times. I think, to Shane's question, you might be right, Ryan. We missed a big moment when George Floyd was killed, but we're at a point we have to make our own moments. I don't think we can wait on a moment. I think at this juncture, and I don't think we can wait on a leader. I think we all have to be leaders. I think that God does give opportunities, and when He gives those opportunities, we must act. But then there are other times, like between the Old and New Testament, 400 years went by. People just couldn't stop living. We have to continue to live and continue to progress. And so the question is, what will we do with the time that we have? And I think that the work that you're doing, the work that's going on there in the Quad Cities, some of what's going on down here in Phoenix is good work, but we have to galvanize the forces together. And we have to try to bring this thing together across racial lines. There is no way that people of color will be able to convince people who are not of color that there is a problem that must be fixed. It didn't happen then, and it won't happen now. The problem has to be identified clearly, a bright line, and then there needs to be a foundational effort to agree on what the solution needs to be, and then a movement needs to grow out of that agreement. And again, it's not something that is. It's not something that I think is magically going to happen. At this point in time, I think it's incumbent upon us to put our heads together, our hearts together, and pray about making it happen.
And all I can say is amen to that. So again, thank you all. My time is up. Thank you all for joining us, and may you find your place in the cause that Dr. King died for. May you find a way to celebrate, memorialize, to encourage someone else of Dr. King as we celebrate his birthday and remember Dr. King this upcoming weekend and on Monday. Again, thank you and good night.
Wow, that was